Hello and welcome to Farm Connections. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. On today's episode, we talk with Shonyo about the importance of pollinator habitats at the bee shed north of Rochester. Thiesse updates us on the current state of the Farm Bill, and JoAnn Lower takes us on a stroll down memory lane as she tells a tale about comfort food. All here today on Farm Connections.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections, sponsored by Alcorn Clean Fuel, a farmer-owned cooperative in Claremont, Minnesota, produces ethanol, high-protein livestock feed, and corn oil, and beverage-grade carbon dioxide for resale to benefit its members and their communities. Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility, produces 115 million gallons of ethanol annually, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood. Southern Minnesota Center for Agriculture, promoting education and careers in agriculture, connecting students with college, curriculum, and industry resources to develop, fill, and sustain jobs with agriculture in our region.
We're north of Rochester, Minnesota to learn about bees, pollinators, and habitat. And with me to help us learn more about that is Shonyo from the Bee Shed. John, welcome to Farm Connections.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great. I always like to talk about bees.
Well, John, you've got some interesting things happening here, but tell us how you started in beekeeping. This is amazing.
Yeah, well, besides my general interest in nature, I had an uncle who was in beekeeping about 60 years. He got into it after World War II. And when he decided to get out of it, he ended up giving me a couple of his hives. And it sat in our garage for a while, and I was told to use it or lose it. And so I decided to use it. And once I got into it, it was like an addiction almost. I mean, the bees are so fascinating. I had no idea what I was getting into. And pretty soon, I went from 2 hives to now, between my business partner and I, we have over 100. So as you can see, that we've really take this stuff serious. So
well, I'm glad you do, and it's grown. But you said it was fascinating once you got into it. What was fascinating?
It's just everything. It's the things that the bees do, how they, for example, how they communicate with each other, how they know how to fly to a certain nectar source and tell the rest of their worker bees where that is, or the forager bees where that is, and come back. How they put their comb together, their honeycomb together. It's it's six-sided, and they're exactly the same across the whole frame. I mean, it's just, I could go on and on, but they're like structural engineers, and they're communicators, and they're scientists. They know, for instance, when the honey gets to a certain moisture level in their hive, they cap it with wax. They know that it's 18% moisture. I mean, how do the bees know that? I mean, it's stuff like that. And you keep learning. I've been in it about 10 years, and I keep learning new stuff all the time.
Well, John, we're on the Northwood Orchards property, and there must be some synergy that brings you here, and you were welcomed by the orchard keeper, right?
Right, yep.
Why does he want you here?
Well, basically, it's simple. It's for pollinating his apple trees. And so we're happy to oblige. The bees get really good nectar from the apple trees. He gets pollinated blossoms, and which creates his apples, obviously. There's a big difference. I'm not an orchard expert, but according to the owner here, there's a big difference from before he had bees till after he had bees. He says his apple crop just kind of exploded once he had enough bees around to pollinate. And that's true for a lot of crops. There's people that pollinate apples. There's almonds that are big in California. They need bees. They can't self-pollinate, so they use bees. Almost all the fruits and many of the vegetables we eat are pollinated by bees, even cranberries. So,
well, it must be working here because the crop looks very bountiful. The trees are just loaded with beautiful apples.
Yep. And sometimes the weather will interfere, but as long as there's bees, you're going to get the best apple crop possible based on what the weather's like and everything else.
And so the bees are taking the pollen on their wings and on their body and moving it from flower to flower?
Right, and then they bring some pollen back to the hives as well. And they use that, they make a bee bread, which is a combination of pollen and nectar. And they'll use that as a source of food.
So John, you mentioned the geometry inside of that hive and also inside of the comb.
Right.
Well, that is fascinating, but do you sell it in the comb also?
We do. In fact, that's the way it used to always be sold, is in the comb a long time ago. And then people would take that honeycomb and they'd squeeze it in cheesecloth, and that's how they get the honey. And then the wax they'd keep for candles or lotions or whatever else. So, but sometime in the late 40s, 50s on up, people in the U.S. decide they like their honey liquid that they can squeeze out of a bottle. So that whole honeycomb that we call, we still sell it, and people who like it really like it. It's kind of fun to eat. It's like, it's chewy with honey inside the wax, and you can swallow the wax. It's perfectly fine. But it's about as natural as you can get it, because we literally cut it right out of the comb, or out of the hive, and we package it up. So no processing whatsoever.
John, with all of that happening, in the background we hear noise or information about not having pollinators available or certain things in our environment causing harm to bees and the population. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, unfortunately I can talk to it, because it's a big issue with not just us, but with all beekeepers right now. We have a perfect storm of things happening that are hurting the bee population. The thing that we see up here, in most every place, there's a mite called the varroa mite. And it's a little mite that's a bloodsucker, and they get on the bees, and they'll suck the blood on the bees. They won't kill the bee outright, but they weaken the immune system of the bees. So any other kind of disease that might come along, the bees are much more susceptible to, and that's how they die. And the problem, we got this mite, which is a bug on a bug. So how do we kill the mite as a bug and not harm the bees? And there are some things that we're using now that won't kill all the mites, but will get the mite population down enough where the bees have a chance to survive. But that's relatively new. That's within the last, when I got into this 10 years ago, I didn't know what a mite was, and now it's a huge issue. Yeah. And then other things, lack of forage. There's just not as many wildflowers around anymore. The CRP land is kind of disappearing a bit, and then also the development. If we look around Rochester, the housing developments are coming out into the countryside. They're taking over a lot of what used to be wild land or woods. So the lack of forage, and then pesticides is always an issue. The ones with the neonicotinoids that are impregnated in the seed of whatever it might be that's growing. The bees don't do well on those types of plants. Now, fortunately, where we're at, all of our hives are a ways away from egg land, so we don't have to worry about the pesticides as much.
How about golf courses and commercial properties when they use insecticide around
Well, it's not just the insecticides. We call it a desert, a bee desert, because they take all the weeds, like
no dandelions.
Beekeepers say let the dandelions live, because that's a very important source of food for them in the spring. And if you have to get rid of them, wait till they're done blooming, and then you can do whatever you want with the dandelions. But so no dandelions, no vetch, no a lot of different things that people see as bad for the lawns are actually outstanding food source for the bees.
Well, John, let's take that for a second. Around us is a nice windbreak, which I'm guessing is strategic for where you put the beehives. And in back of us is a wonderful pollinator bed of multi-species kinds of things.
Right.
How can the audience, the average homeowner, the average business owner help improve our habitat?
Sure. Well, most people who live in town have some kind of garden. What we'd ask them to do is, rather than just planting any old flower, take a look at, find out which ones are good for pollinators. Not just bees, but butterflies, different kinds of bees, like the bumblebees. There's a bunch of wild bees. Take a look and then plant those type of flowers. They're just as pretty as any other type of flower, but they really help attract pollinators and helps us. If you're really ambitious, you can, you can do a wildflower plot, and it doesn't have to be very big, but you can basically kill off the grass, a plot of grass in your yard, and then replant it with wildflowers. It doesn't take a lot of work, but for a couple of years it's going to look pretty ugly, and that's why people don't do it, I think. But just be aware of the type of plants you're buying. There's a lot of commercial plants that you can buy that actually have the seed has neonicotinoid treatment. So take a look at the tag, just make sure they don't have that. Take the flowers, first of all, they're good pollinators. Second of all, make sure they don't have that pesticide treatment.
They're attractive for the yard, and you don't have to spend as much time mowing.
Well, that's our other thing that we tell people. If you don't like mowing, plant wildflowers and for pollinators, and you've solved two problems.
And John, our ag producers have been doing a better and better job of putting land into conservation reserve program, pollinator plants, and using those areas on the edge of their farm and in their yard. If you'll notice, they really are trying.
And there's, I know there's state funding available for some of those plantings around the fields, I think.
Yes.
I don't know the details, so, but I know there's some funding available to encourage farmers to do that.
Certainly you could visit your local soil water conservation district or FSA office, and they've got programs including funding. Good point.
Yep.
Great point.
Yeah, they're grants. They're not loans. They're grants to do that. So.
And they help us all.
They really do.
John, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing with us today on Farm Connections.
No, glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
Hi, this is Kent Thiesse. Many members of Congress have been working on a new farm bill for the past couple of years. By July of 2018, both the U.S. House and U.S. Senate had passed versions of a new farm bill. While there's a lot of similarities in these bills, there's also some major differences that need to be worked out. The two farm bills will now go to conference committee between the U.S. House and Senate to try and work out those differences. Once those differences are worked out, both bodies will then have to vote on the farm bill again before it goes to the president to be signed into law. The current farm bill governing farm programs, food and nutrition programs, conservation, and other programs expires on September 30th of 2018. Both the U.S. House and Senate versions of the farm bill would keep most of the farm programs that affect commodities to farm operators virtually the same as the current farm program. Farm operators would again have a choice between the Ag Risk Coverage Program, which is yield and price, and a price-only price loss coverage program on various commodities. This would be a 5-year selection. Most of the payment formulas would remain the same as the current program. One of the biggest differences in the two versions of the bill comes in the conservation title of the Farm Bill. The U.S. House version of the Farm Bill would increase CRP acres by 1 million acres a year up to a total of 29 million acres by the year 2023. By comparison, the U.S. Senate version of the Farm Bill would only increase the CRP maximum acreage by 1 million acres up to 25 million acres from the current level of 24 million acres. Both of the House and Senate versions would lower the maximum rental rate that can be paid on CRP acres to about 80 to 90% of the maximum allowable rate. Another change in the conservation title is that the U.S. House version would eliminate the Conservation Security Program, which provides funding for conservation programs on working farms, while the U.S. Senate version would maintain that program for the future. The biggest difference in the two versions of the Farm Bill is probably in the food and nutrition title, which provides SNAP or supplemental nutrition benefits, better known as food stamps, to families across the U.S. The U.S. Senate version of the Farm Bill would virtually keep that program similar to what it is now, while the U.S. House version would add requirements for family members to either work or receive training in order to receive those benefits. Farm bills in the past have often been passed with strong bipartisan support of both parties. This year that was true in the Senate, but in the House it was very partisan and kind of reflects kind of the nature of some of the conflicts that are going on in Congress today. It is hoped that as we get to a conference committee, they can return to that bipartisan support and that we can come up with a good farm bill that works well for both farm operators and to families and communities affected by the Farm Bill. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next time.
I would like to tell you a story about comfort food. At least that's what we call it now. On the farm, it was just what Mom cooked every day. And cooked a lot of it. Especially on those harvest days when my three uncles came on their tractors from Buffalo Center, Iowa to our farm south of Thompson. My Uncle Red, my Uncle Grant, my Uncle, oh my goodness, my three uncles. Yes. Came up the driveway, their big tractors. Now my brothers got to help drive the tractor too, but not me. I had to be in the house and helping Mom cook. Remember how it was? Go out to the garden, peas, string beans, sweet corn, dig the potatoes, wash the potatoes, peel the potatoes, mash the potatoes after they're cooked, and you have this gigantic bowl of mashed potatoes with a little lake of butter on the top. T-bone steaks. Yes, stacks of them, perfectly fried. Angel food cakes, apple pies with cheese. Oh, enough food for an army. And they seemed to know when 12 o'clock was, my dad and my three uncles. They brought their ravenous appetites through the kitchen door and sat down. And what had taken Mom and I all morning to prepare was devoured in less than 5 minutes. Then they would thank Mom very courteously, pick up their seed corn caps from their chair leg, walk outside, burp, and take a nap under a shade tree for 15 or 20 minutes. Then back out to the field. As Mom and I went to the dishpan and washed all those stacks of dishes. Time for Mom's nap, but shortly after, back to the kitchen to make lunch for the men in the field. Homemade buns, ham and cheese, chocolate cake with thick chocolate frosting, peanut butter cookies, coffee. Drive the truck to the field's edge. I think that my mom was more appreciated at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when she and I brought lunch to the men in the field than she was at any other time of the day. 6 meals a day. I wonder if she knew what she had signed up for when she married my dad and became a farm wife. Yes, it went like breakfast, lunch, dinner, lunch, supper, lunch. 6 meals a day, and no one ever gained an ounce. So much hard work. Comfort food. But it wasn't just my 2 brothers, Jim and Don, and me, and my dad and my mom, that Mom cooked for. Often there would be someone who came knocking on the door at 12 o'clock noon. Mom, in maybe her less than cheery voice, would invite them to have a seat at the table. One day, it was our fancy relatives from California who came. We thought they were fancy because they had jobs in town, in an office, and they were paid with a check every month. They were fancy. They were rich, we thought. They sat at the table with us, the 5 of them, second helpings all around. And when the woman had finished her second plateful, she kind of patted her belly and she said, Isn't farm food just the best? You know, so simple and basic. Basic, maybe? Basic? Simple? I wonder if she had ever raised, killed, plucked, and cooked enough chickens for even this table full of people. And did she have a garden where she planted peas and string beans and sweet corn and potatoes? And did she ever make those huge chocolate angel food cakes and apple pies? I wonder if she ever did that. Simple? I don't think so. Basic? Yup. Comfort foods, for sure. You know, comfort foods like Johnny cake and scalloped chicken. All that yummy stuff that I miss. And when I want to remember what it was like on that farm 4 miles south of Thompson, sitting around the kitchen table with Mom and Dad and Jim and Don and eating mashed potatoes and gravy, fried chicken. It feels like a comfort. It's comfort food, made by heart, served with love.
The emergence of B20, a 20% blend of biodiesel fuel in Minnesota, has been a resounding success. Minnesota became the first state in the nation to mandate a 20% blend of the fuel made from soybeans. The effort has taken many years, lots of research, and lobbying and promotional efforts for the soybean industry, led by Minnesota Soybean. Tom Slunecka is executive director.
In Minnesota, 20% of all the diesel fuel is made from soybean oil. This is biodiesel. We haven't had any complaints on the system since we moved over. We're helping consumers, we're helping farmers, we're helping the entire economy. We just couldn't be happier about this, of what Minnesota is doing in leading the biofuels industry.
There are many advantages of a 20% biodiesel blend, one of which is increased demand for soybeans, something that is important to Minnesota farmers.
It's great for farmers. I mean, it's 63 cents that these farmers are getting that they would have never had if it wasn't for biodiesel. 63 cents on every bushel of soybeans. So, you know, performance is great. It makes it really fun to run a tractor again. It smells like French fries, so it's really fun. You don't smell that sulfur and that bad emissions coming out of diesel.
The biodiesel effort has involved a lot of cooperation from many groups and individuals. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture has been at the forefront.
It's a good opportunity for farmers, adding value, cleaning up the air quality, creating jobs for rural Minnesota, and reducing our dependency on foreign oil. All of those things are great.
Minnesota Soybean has used creative ways to promote biodiesel, something farmers at the recent Minnesota Farm Fest show had a chance to see. This Diesel Brothers truck is at county fairs, farm shows, and other events, is just one of the many tools the Minnesota soybean growers have been using to promote biodiesel. The biggest tool is it's working well for Minnesota farmers and consumers. This is Lynn Ketelsen reporting.
It's important to remember how all things in life are connected. From the bees in the field to a family at home, we all share in life's common fiber, a community built of trust and need. I'm Dan Hoffman. Thank you for joining us today on Farm Connections.